The war in Ukraine turned 11 months old today. By all appearances, the end is nowhere in sight. You'd be forgiven for having forgotten this milestone, given that this war is barely talked about any longer, even though U.S. involvement has escalated and continues to escalate virtually every month. And all signs point to further escalation with no end. In a bizarre paradox, the more dangerous this war becomes to all of us, the less debate there is on the wisdom of plunging further and further ahead. In essence, this is our new Afghanistan. Now, I know the immediate response to that. It is true that we do not have military boots on the ground in Ukraine, though there most certainly are plenty of American boots from places like the CIA. But that is now how the U.S. fights wars, including in Afghanistan, through Proxy. Recall the vaunted Afghan security forces and the Free Syrian Army we kept hearing were doing the real fighting in order to vanquish the Taliban and Bashar al-Assad, while the U.S. was merely pouring billions and billions of your dollars into fueling those wars and arming those factions. The Taliban, by the way, and Bashar al-Assad are still in power. What really matters to the bipartisan war class in Washington is not where boots are, but where money goes. As long as they have an endless war that justifies endless weapons purchases and expanding U.S. security state budgets in D.C., everyone in Washington is happy. And when it comes to Ukraine, U.S. policymakers and key establishment figures from both parties, as usual, speak with one voice. We are in Ukraine for as long as it takes, 5 years, 15 years, 50 years, doesn't matter. And we'll spend however much of your money it takes. The $100 billion already sent, $500 billion, $1 trillion, or more. From the start, the U.S. involvement in this war has followed a very predictable pattern. First, Biden officials vow that they will never pass a certain limit of involvement, such as sending a particular weapon system or deploying any boots on the ground, because to do so would be too dangerous and too escalatory. And then, months later, sometimes just a couple months later, after that vow is issued, the White House starts leaking to its favorite reporters that it is now prepared to do exactly that which they vowed they would not do just months earlier on the grounds that doing so would be too escalatory. There are too many examples of this pattern in just 11 months to do anything beyond offer you a couple of illustrative examples. So let's start. Back in March, when Ukrainian President Zelensky included on his always long and seemingly endless list of demands for more U.S. weapons and money, he wanted the transport to his country of U.S. Patriot defense missile systems. But U.S. officials back then categorically refused. As Defense One reported, quote, Pentagon officials will not send the advanced Patriot air defense system to Ukraine, saying Thursday that U.S. forces would need to enter Ukraine to operate it, which is a non-starter for the Biden administration. The decision comes one day after U.S. officials rejected a proposal from Poland to have the United States and NATO transfer Polish MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine. Quote, there's no discussion about putting a Patriot battery in Ukraine. In order to do that, you have to put U.S. troops with it to operate it, a senior defense official said Thursday. It is not a system that Ukrainians are familiar with, and as we have made clear, there will be no U.S. troops fighting in Ukraine. A mere 8 months later, last month, you'll never guess what the U.S. announced it was dispatching to Ukrainian battalions. That's right. The very same Patriot defense systems which they had months earlier proclaimed to be a non-starter. The headline there tells you the story. Quote, U.S. to send Patriot system to Ukraine in new $1.85 billion package. As The Hill explained, quote, the United States, for the first time, will send a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine as part of a major $1.85 billion weapons package the Pentagon revealed Wednesday. Until now, the United States has held off on sending the Patriot system to Ukraine over fears it could escalate the war. But the Biden administration has changed its position after weeks of deliberation over highly classified technology the weapons contain. In September, Zelensky was demanding, this is just in September, just 4 months ago, President Zelensky was demanding that both the U.S. and Germany send their most advanced tanks after he got the Patriot missile system. German officials, wary of avoiding direct military confrontation with Russia, given how poorly that turned out for both of those countries and the world, the two last times it happened in the prior century, Germany refused Zelensky's request. saying they would neither send their own tanks nor give permission to Poland to send German tanks to Ukraine unless and until the U.S. first sent its Abrams tanks to Ukraine. But one thing we have learned is that President Zelensky's demands never stay rejected for very long. At first, U.S. officials, presumably eager to avoid provoking escalation and greater confrontation with the world's largest nuclear armed power, something you would hope our government would be doing, refused to send those tanks, just like they refused at first to send the Patriot missiles. Look at this firm resolve captured by the Political headline. Quote, "These are not rental cars. As Ukraine pleads for tanks, the West holds back." Now, back then, U.S. officials were adamant that tanks would not be part of the stocking stuffers the U.S. had been showering on Kiev. Quote, "The tanks have shot to the top of Kiev's wish list as Ukraine presses its gains in the eastern Donbass region amid the shocking Russian collapse this month. The request took on new urgency this week after Vladimir Putin announced that he would mobilize 300,000 additional troops for the fight in Ukraine, a major escalation of the campaign. The more modern American-made M1 Abrams and German-made Leopard tanks would add a powerful punch that could help Kiev's forces capture and hold more ground compared to the old Soviet-era tanks they currently operate, say experts and Ukrainian advisors. But top national security officials in both countries, Germany and the U.S., have hesitated to provide the tanks, in part due to the training and logistic challenges involved, according to U.S. officials, Ukrainian advisors, and congressional aides. The M1s, for example, are a completely different system than the Soviet-era tanks Ukraine currently operates and require significant maintenance and logistical support. Quote, "It's a pretty high hurdle to get Ukraine not only U.S.-made tanks, but the parts to maintain them," said one U.S. official, who, like others interviewed for the article, of course, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss ongoing conversations. Quote, "You don't want to give them something that's going to break down and run out of gas and they can't refuel them." That was September, just 4 months ago. But when it comes to U.S. largesse for Ukraine, that's practically 10 lifetimes ago. So here you have today, surprise, the U.S. making a new announcement, and they did it through a leak to the Wall Street Journal. And the headline of that article reads, quote, "U.S. poised to provide, guess what, Abrams tanks to Ukraine." That article explained, quote, "The Biden administration is poised to send a significant number of Abrams N1 tanks to Ukraine, settling a rift that threatened to the unity of the alliance supporting Ukraine at a pivotal moment in the war," U.S. officials said. The move, which could be announced as soon as Wednesday, would be part of a broader diplomatic understanding with Germany in which Berlin would agree to send a similar number of its own Leopard 2 tanks and would approve the delivery of more of the German-made tanks by Poland and other nations. The shift in the U.S. position follows a January 17th call between President Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in which Mr. Biden agreed to look into providing the Abrams tanks against the judgment of the Pentagon, which thought the tanks would be too difficult for Ukraine to field and maintain. So what we have in just 11 months is extraordinarily rapid and multi-pronged escalation of the involvement of our government in that war on the other side of the world. It first began with assurances that we would do nothing other than help Ukraine with occasional expenditures in order to let them have a fair fight with Russia. And each month, literally each month, brought greater and greater at first expenditures, culminating in a $40 billion package in May, $40 billion on top of the $13.5 billion immediately allocated. And that number is now at $100 billion. A funding package supported by the establishment wings of both parties. Remember, in May, the $40 billion package received a yes vote from every single last Democrat in Congress, while 6 or 7 dozen Republicans in the House and the Senate voted no, but the majority of the GOP caucus was in agreement with everyone from the squad and Nancy Pelosi to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema that Joe Biden's war policy should be funded. And then ever since, beyond the money being sent, we're now escalating further the way in which we're fueling this proxy war by sending increasingly sophisticated weapons. Now, whenever I talk about the war in Ukraine and the U.S. role in it, before I delve into any of the other issues, I believe the paramount question is always this one. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.